In video 9 and now 14, we're going to look at the transmission fluid pump itself and the seals and the input shaft.
Here we got the pump and the torque converter. What we done, just to make sure our gears and our pump drive slots line up with the gears, we just set the old pump, or we just set the pump onto the old converter to make sure it all locks down good. It kind of helps align everything, something I like to do. It squares everything up. And then I'm going to torque these bolts that keep the pump halves together. Torque your bolts. It's 15 foot-pounds. And before we put the pump on, that's our next step in this build. We take this old big gigantic O-ring off, simply replace it with a new one. Just work around, make sure you got it on there right. You don't want any lint or crud on it. Now we're going to grease our little rings we had installed previously. When you install the pump into the input drum, so an end could stick up, possibly break the end off, and then you have a leak. Grease doesn't hurt it, it will dissipate very, very quickly after pressure happens. We'll come over here, we got our new pump gasket. The case is good. We'll line it up. It only goes on one way. Flip it over the other way and it won't work. That's how the gasket goes. One last thing before we put our pump gasket on is this little guy here. It's called a cooler bypass valve. What happens with this is when it's cold outside, or just the tranny hasn't warmed up at all, been sitting all night, this valve closes and doesn't allow cooler oil to go through the radiator cooler and up front in the engine bay, or if you got an external cooler beyond your radiator cooler, it keeps it from circulating up there, thus warming the transmission up quicker. Automatic transmissions, they don't like to be cold. The oil needs to be a certain temperature for them to function properly. So they put these little guys in here to stop that. Now, there is a way to check these, and it's simply just by blowing through this hole, stick it into your mouth, blow through it. If anything blows through it, then the one-way check ball and spring are weak, plugged up, dirty or something. If you can't blow through it, then it's fine. We're going to go ahead and replace the O-ring on this little cooler bypass valve as well, because that would give it, a bad O-ring would give it more of an opportunity to leak, and it would not warm up as fast as it could. Sometimes these can plug closed too and not let cooler flow go to the radiator, and transmission can overheat. This little valve goes with a pointy end up. We'll stick it into the case, and it goes down a little ways, and it must be level with the case or just underneath it. Too high and it's bound up. Now we're going to install our pump gasket. It can only go on one way. It looks funny here, but that's normal. Your bolt holes are all one way only. And then we have our pump gasket. Now it's time to set our pump in place. Don't use any sealant on the pump gasket, because the surfaces are very flat, they're machined to match each other, and they work quite well as long as things are torqued down properly. So never use any kind of silicone or any kind of sealant for it. And we're going to put our pump in, and you can see this open cutout and this cutout, they match these two areas down here. This area is going to match that one, the bigger one's going to match the bigger area, and you can see the gasket is cut out to that gasket. This pump comes from the front wheel drive version of this tranny too, the 41TE. This section here actually clears the transfer gear shaft inside the front wheel drive version of this. So pumps are the same. And last but not least, before our pump goes on, we have this needle roller. It will actually stick on the pump like this. So just face it up, and you can actually drop it down into the input drum. And it is all the way down where it should be. And we're ready for our pump. You don't want to drop it down in there. You don't want to shove it down there. Let it naturally go into place. There's sealing rings everywhere, and it takes time. Just go lightly, kind of give it a little turn, and they'll slowly fall into place. If something's wrong, then it will not fall into place, and you'll have to go back and check. And that one fell in. Now at this time I'm going to get a couple pump bolts. These copper washers, we've replaced these with new ones. This is just so they torque good, seal good, and they hold their torque value real well. You don't ever want to use old copper washers. Roll in, we'll run them down. Just run the bolts down till they touch. Each one of them. Don't ever just force one in. Let it touch. We're going to work this pump down a little bit at a time. We're just going to run, pump goes in quite a ways. We're just going to alternate a little bit. Go a little bit at a time so we don't damage anything. Now our last step is to torque the pump bolts to 15 foot-pounds. Just grab the input shaft with your hand, and it turns beautifully. You can get down here and look at your work. Spin it a few times. Now you're looking through the area where the valve body goes. And you can see the rotating internals of the tranny. So we're done with everything internal in the transmission. Now we're ready for the valve body.